I might have to leave just a bit early, if you don't mind.
Say that again, Johnny.
I might have to leave just a bit early.
Jolly good, whatever. Thank you for telling us. We'll miss you. Right, welcome back, everybody, after our little enforced break. We are learning Sanhedrin, and we just started to learn a very important halachic principle. And that was, what do you do when you've got a positive commandment and a negative commandment that are in conflict with one another? Which takes precedence? Do you say the positive commandment overrides the negative, or the other way around? And then we have another situation. What if you've got a positive commandment that is in conflict with both a positive and a negative commandment? Is it 2 against 1, or how does it go? So that was what we were dipping our toe into last time. We're on page 9. We're actually right at the bottom of page 18b, the last few words of 18b. We are then going to turn over to 19a. It's on page 106. For those of you who've got the Steinsaltz Gemarah, I shall put it on the screen for the rest of you.
There was something in the paper, Johnny, Johnny?
Yeah?
There was something in the paper when you were away. Well, I think it was maybe one of your articles. It was on the financial, somebody writes a financial thing, someone called Katzman, I think it is. And he said, he always gives a bit on the Parsha of the week. And he mentioned about the Kohen Gadol couldn't marry a divorced woman, I think it was, because when he's in, he might have, when he was before he was a Kohen Gadol, he might have always fancied this woman to marry her, and so when he's in the on Yom Kippur, when he's thinking about things, he could possibly wish the husband dead. Does that make sense?
That's interesting. That's very interesting, because I don't think we'll get to it today.
Yes.
I don't think we'll get to it today, but if it's not today, it'll be next week or the week after. We're going to come across a similar, not exactly the same, but a very similar concept about who goes to comfort a Kohen Gadol when he is mourning. Remember, we mentioned it in the Mishnah.
We did,
some time ago, and we're going to get the next little bit after what we're doing now is the drilling down into that part of the Mishnah as to how a Kohen Gadol comforts others and how he is comforted by others. And in that second, one sec, Julia, in that second section, we're going to come across a scenario which is quite similar to what you've just said. Right. And so therefore, I think that what you've just said has definitely got some source to it. And that is that we try and avoid situations whereby we put people in a position where they might come to do something which isn't right. So hold it it won't be this week. I don't think we'll get to it this week. Okay. Possibly next week. Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. Julia?
I was just going to make a comment on the topic of relevance, that I had people around this week, one of whom was a Cohen who recently lost a sister, and when he asked advice, he was told that the correct rules are that unless your sister is a virgin, then you don't go to her funeral. So it was just showing how relevant what we're studying is.
Okay, well, that's interesting, because we actually learned that, we actually read that in 2 weeks ago's Parsha. Let me see if I can just quickly put my hand on it.
That's why he was mentioning it that week, 2 weeks.
There we go. Here we go. Yeah, it is in Parshat Emor, which we said we read 2 weeks ago. What have you got on the screen now? Have you got the Vayikra on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So have a look at this, Julia. Over here. The first, well, Jeffrey's with us, so we can get Jeffrey to do a bit of work. Jeffrey, read those 3 psukim for us, will you? First
And the
of all,
Lord said to Moses, speak to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, let none of you defile himself for a dead person amongst his people, except for his relative who is close to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, and for his virgin sister who is close to him, who was not yet with a man for her, he shall defile himself.
Okay, so there you go. It is a clear pasuk in the Torah that tells us that mother, father, son, daughter, brother, and in Hebrew, la'achoto ha'betula hakrova elav, a sister who is a betula, a virgin, hakrova elav, who is close to him. I'm not sure what that really means. Asher lo hayta le'ish, who had not been with a man. I don't know what that means either, because we've already said she's a betula. So why do we need to say that? I don't know. La, for her, yitama, he can be defiled. In other words, he can go to the funeral and all that stuff. But for the implication is a sister who is not a betula, or who is not close to him, or who has been with a man. La yitama. For her, she lo yitama. He would not be able to defile. I think I know what the redundancy here is. There seems to be a redundancy of betula, a virgin, and asher lo hayta le'ish, and who is not with a man. Okay, and it's not from here, but there is another reference where there is a redundancy, a very similar redundancy. I'm just going to find exactly where it is. It's in the story of Lot and his daughters. Let me see if I can just find it. Probably in Parashat Vayera, I imagine, because that was when that story happened. Let me see if I can find it, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so it's chapter 19 of Bereshit. Let's get that up and see if we can find it very quickly, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. There we go. This is the beginning of, remember, the story of the angels came to Abraham, and they then went down to Sodom and Gomorrah, to destroy it and to rescue Lot, the nephew of Abraham. Yeah, remember that story, everyone?
Yeah. Verse 8.
So what happened was Lot saw these 2 visitors, and they came out, and they wanted to take these visitors, and the local folk wanted to take the visitors out and violate these visitors. That wasn't the kind of thing you did in Sodom, which was to bring people in. And they said, here's verse 5 on the screen, Jeffrey, please.
And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, and let us be intimate with them. And Lot came...
So that's what they wanted to do. And then they, so what did Lot say? Lot said, verse 8.
Behold, now I have 2 daughters who were not intimate with a man. I will bring them out to you, and do to them as you see fit. Only to these men do nothing, because they have come under the shadow of my roof.
Okay, so there you go. They were. That's what they said to him. And then there's another pasuk somewhere else. I can't exactly remember where it is, but it refers to these daughters as virgins who have not seen another man, who have not known another man. So we have the same redundancy somewhere. Can't remember, just put my fingers on it. But it's yes.
Before they have relations with their father.
No, that was different. This was before that, yeah. This was before that had happened. So where are we now? Yes. So there is where was our pasuk? We were in that's the one. We were talking about, what were we talking about? We were talking about the virgin sister who is close to him, who's not yet with a man. Okay, so the Rashi in that other place, I can't just put my finger on it, but Rashi is a very famous Rashi. Every Cheder Yingle, every little Cheder boy knows this Rashi, because Rashi asks the question and says, what do you mean that she's a virgin and she's not known any man? What does that mean? It means they're the same thing. And Rashi says there that Rashi says there that it means that she has not known a man kedarka in its normal fashion, or shalo kedarka, and not in its normal fashion, meaning anal intercourse. So there's a famous joke that the Cheder boy says to the Rebbe when they're learning this Rashi. He says to this Cheder boy, says to the Rebbe, what does it mean shalo kedarka, in not in a normal way? And the Rebbe says, gives him a shmais across the face and says, what do you mean? You know what it means the normal way? That you're asking such a question? It's a famous joke, so everybody knows that Rashi. But anyway, so that's what it means here. Here, habitulah means a virgin, as in Virgo intacta, and ashelo haita leish means shelo kedarka, in a not natural way. Okay, so that was just a digression from Julia's comment there. But yeah, that was in the Sedra 2 weeks ago. Right. What's that got to do with us?
So the Cohen can't go to the funeral of a sister, is that right?
That's right. So you cannot go to the funeral of a married sister.
Why would that be?
Because once the sister has married, we have the concept, don't we, that once a person is married, they should yidbak leishto, they cling to their wife and they leave their father and their mother. Once a woman has married, they are considered to be part of the in-laws family, and they're no longer krova elav, they're no longer considered to be as close as they were previously, and that's the halacha. So
why can't he go to his sister who's not married?
Because she's still part of the family and she's krova elav, she's close to him.
Yes, so why can't he go to the funeral?
He can if she's not married.
Oh, he can go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if she never married, because she remains as part of the closeness of the family. She loses that closeness of the family once she marries into a different family. Right. Let's go back to the Gemarah, because I can't remember why we were talking about that. But we are talking about this idea of the positive commandment versus the negative commandment. And what are we talking about in particular? We're talking about Yibum, levirate marriage. Okay, the Kohen Gadol has a brother, and that brother is married, and the brother dies childless. In the 1 second, Hannah, I'll come to you in a mo. The brother dies childless. We know the halacha, when a man dies childless, the brother has to marry the widow in a procedure called Yibum. And if he doesn't want to, he has to do this procedure called chalitza, with the shoe and the spitting and all that stuff. And it's a degrading, that's the word, degrading performance, ceremony, because he really should do Yibum. Now, Kohen Gadol has got a problem, because he can't do Yibum because she's a widow. And we learnt in the same, if I'm not mistaken, the same chapter, that he is only able to marry, there we go. Jeffrey, if you don't mind, please. We're talking about the Kohen Gadol, verse 13 on the screen.
You shall marry a woman in her virgin state.
And verse 14.
A widow, a divorcee, a woman who is desecrated, or a prostitute, he shall not marry any of these. Only a virgin of his people may he take as a wife.
Okay, so that was the same chapter as that we needed for Julia's scenario there. A Kohen Gadol can only marry a virgin and cannot marry a divorcee. So we've got a problem with our Yibum, haven't we? Because on the one hand, he has a positive commandment to do Yibum. On the other hand, he has a negative commandment. He's not allowed to marry a divorcee, a widow. He's not allowed to marry a widow. So we have so then we have a dilemma. What do we do? We've got a situation where there's a positive commandment and a negative commandment. What do we do, everyone? What's the halacha? Which takes precedence? Sorry, Hannah, you wanted to say something before you rush off. What did you want to say? Sorry, I forgot that you had your hand up because it went away.
I was still back at the previous discussion. It suddenly struck me that where you said, what does it mean who he is close to? And I suddenly thought that maybe when a woman gets divorced or when she's widowed and she comes back to her father's home again, and she can eat Kodesh again. She's in the house, but she's not close to her to the Kohen Gadol anymore, to her brother. It could be that, as you said, she loses that closeness, although she's still part of the family and she's his sister, but she's no longer close to him.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are various halachot which I haven't looked at for quite a number of years since I did my smicha, because it's not the kind of thing that you get asked on a regular basis. But there are halachot about what a brother and sister can do in terms of hugging and kissing and embracing when she is single and when she is married. The halachot are different, and I suspect that this is probably the source of that. I'm not going to quote what those halachot are because I can't actually remember them off the top of my head without re-looking them up. But there is a difference in the halachot of yichud and of embracing and all that kind of stuff with a married sister as opposed to an unmarried sister. And I think that this
or a sister who is now unmarried, but she's been married in the past.
Yeah. So there are. I'll look it up, Bli Neder. I'll look it up. We can discuss it next time. But I'm sure that's the origin of that, and I'm sure you're right about the closeness. Martin, you wanted to ask something. Martin, you have your hand up. No, it's an aberration. Okay. Right. So what do we think, folk? You've got the positive commandment of Yibum and the negative commandment of don't marry a widow. Which takes precedence? Hands up if you think that negative takes precedence and he doesn't do Yibum because of the prohibition to marry a widow. Okay. So Michael, Avril, and Johnny think that the negative takes precedence. Hands up those that think that the positive takes precedence and he should do Yibum. Okay, Jeffrey has sat on the fence and not put his hand up for either. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Well, you've got me confused completely, and I don't want to pass an opinion. I will be guided by this. I can't get my head around it.
Okay, let me try and make it simple. The Kohen Gadol has to do Yibum when his brother dies childless, right?
I know about that.
In order to do that, he has to marry the widow. And yet he's not allowed to marry a widow. So we have a positive commandment to marry this widow and a negative commandment that you're not allowed to marry a widow. So what does he do?
I think it's just a special rule just for a Kohen Gadol.
Okay, so all right, that's a possibility.
I think maybe he has to provide for the widow.
Okay, so the obvious answer is, I think the obvious answer, if that was the pure situation, the obvious answer would be that there is a way to get out of this, and that's chalitza. So there is a way where he can keep both commandments. He can do chalitza, and therefore he doesn't need to do yibum, and therefore doesn't need to violate the commandment against marrying a widow. The problem with that is that it's degrading, and you shouldn't do something degrading to the Kohen Gadol. But I would say that it's only he's not really degrading for the Kohen Gadol, because it's the only way he can do it to get out of our dilemma. So I think if that was the normal situation, the answer to the question would be that there is a solution which enables him to keep both, and that's chalitza. However, it's not quite exactly as we see, because I said to you, and I was a little bit disingenuous, I said to you that there is a negative commandment that he's not allowed to marry a widow, and there's a positive commandment that he has to marry the widow for Yibum. But in our situation, Julia has just remembered the end of the last shiur. I can see it in her eyes, that the Kohen Gadol also has a positive commandment. It's there on the screen for us, Jeffrey. Verse 13.
He shall marry a woman in her virgin state.
So that is a positive commandment, is it not? He shall, he must, he will. Okay? So, in our case, we now have a negative commandment to not marry a widow. We have a positive commandment that he has to marry a virgin. And on the other side, we have a negative commandment that a positive commandment he has to do Yibum. So it's 2 against 1. Okay? If he does Yibum, he then violates a positive and a negative. The positive he violates is to marry a virgin, because she's not. The negative is that he's married a widow and he's not allowed. So he's done 2 naughty things if he does Yibum. But he's also done 1 good thing, because he's done Yibum, which he's meant to. 2 against 1, the 2 take precedence. We can all understand that, can't we? So that is a halachic principle. It's an important halachic principle. Where you have a positive commandment versus a negative and a positive, 2 against 1, the 2 takes precedence. We all understand that. It doesn't help us with the 1v1. This case doesn't help us with the 1v1 because it's not a 1v1, it's a 1v2. So the 1v1 case is discussed in another Gemarah, which I'm going to show you now. I showed it you last time, right, very briefly at the end. I'm going to go show it you a bit more now. And that is over here, Yivamot, which is the plural of Yibum. Can you see that? Yeah. It's the same word. So the Gemarah of Yibum is all about, surprisingly, the Gemarah of Yivamot, surprisingly, is all about Yibum. And that's where we find something interesting. But Martin's got his hand up again. Martin, are you with us?
Yes, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
You mentioned the Kohen Gadol is supposed to be married.
Yes.
So surely if he's married, does this mean he can take a second wife?
Can he
or
take
if,
a
once
second
he's
wife?
married, once you're married, surely you can't do Yibum.
Yes, you can take a second wife as long as she's a virgin.
Okay, because I thought
remember the Gezerah of Rabbeinu Gershom that forbade men taking a second wife did not come in until very, very much later. I think, if I'm not mistaken, could be wrong, around about the 9th century. Let me just check that. Because I want to be correct. Google is a wonderful thing. When was the decree of Rabbeinu Gershom one wife enacted? Let's see if I'm right. Oh, there you go. Not far off. It's actually not the 9th century, but the 10th century. So I wasn't far off. There you go. In about 1000 CE, Rabbeinu Gershom, who lived in Germany, formulated a takana decreeing cherem upon any man who married more than one wife. So that didn't come in, Martin, for another, Well, from when the Gemarah was written, another 500 years later after the Gemarah.
Okay, thank you.
Also, it wasn't binding on all communities.
Correct, Hannah. I was about to say that. Why do you think that this little, this is actually, look at where it's from. I mean, this is just Google, but it's correct. It's come from the Jewish Women's Archive. It doesn't matter where it's come from. It's correct. Why do you think they stressed this bit here? Who lived in Germany? What is the old-fashioned name for Germany? In rabbinic literature, what is the name for Germany? In modern Hebrew, it's Germania.
It's Ashkenaz.
It is Ashkenaz, correct. Ashkenaz is the name for Germany. And the reason that the Jewish Women's Archive have specifically put in where he lived is because of what Hannah just said. The Takana de Rabbeinu Gershom, as it's known as, the decree of Rabbeinu Gershom, was enacted in Ashkenaz and is only binding on Ashkenazim. The Sephardim never took on the Takana of Rabbeinu Gershom. If you are a Sephardi man, according to Halacha, you can have more than one wife, even today. And I think that in some places they do. So that's an interesting aside. How did we get onto that? Oh, Martin's question about, yes, he can take a second wife, this Kohen Gadol, as long as she is a virgin. Okay, so we were at the Gemarah in Yevamot, weren't we? So in the Gemarah in Yevamot, it's discussing this idea of what you do when you have a positive and a negative commandment. Which one takes precedence, the positive or the negative? Now, we had an almost split in our vote here. We had 3 for the negative taking precedence, 2 for the positive, and Jeffrey very wisely kept his counsel. Now, the Gemarah is going to show us what the answer is. And it brings various different suggestions. I'm not going to go through this whole Gemarah because it's a long subject where the Gemarah brings a suggestion, rejects it, brings another one, rejects it, brings another one, rejects it. I'm only going to show you the first one, and then I'll tell you the bottom line. So the first one is this that's on the screen here. We have a problem, don't we? Garments, and we spoke about this briefly last time, and then we went off on a tangent because David Marks asked us about tzitzit. Garments back in the day were all made of linen or wool. That's all they were made of. They didn't have polyester, and they didn't have whatever the other man-made rubbish that we have today. Cotton, yeah, they had cotton, I guess, but that's part of linen is cotton, isn't it? Isn't that the same thing or similar? Anyway, they were made of cotton. They were made of linen or wool. So we have a halakha, don't we, that you can't mix wool and linen. What is that called?
Shatnez.
Shatnez. That's right, shatnez. You cannot mix wool and linen. So you have a you have a linen garment, let's say. You have a linen shirt, and it's got four corners on it, and you have to put your tzitzit on, which are made of
Techelet.
They are made of techelet. They are. That's the color of techelet. What are they made of?
Wool.
Wool. Correct. They're made of wool. So if you have a linen garment made of which has got 4 corners on it, and you put your tzitzit on because you have a positive commandment to put tzitzit on your garment, you are violating shatnez, are you not? So therefore, we've got a dilemma. We've got a 1v1. You've got a mitzvah, positive mitzvah to put tzitzit on, and you've got a negative commandment, don't mix wool and linen. So, right, rabbis, we have a question. Case comes before you. A guy comes with a linen garment, and he says to you, Rabbi, do I put tzitzit on this? Because I don't want to violate shatnez, but I do want to wear tzitzit on my garment, because that's what you're meant to do. How are you going to paskin? Hands up those that say you do put tzitzit on this garment, and the positive overrides the negative. Hands up those that think you do.
You do.
Okay. Okay. We've got 5 do's. And who says you don't? Jeffrey says you don't. And Avril Links is not sure. What do you think, Avril?
You don't have to wear that garment. It's conditional, isn't it?
Okay. That's a very good answer. The correct answer is what Avril said. The halacha is best not to, as they say in the colloquial, besser nicht. Okay, better not to wear that garment in the first place. However, let's say, Avril Links, that that's the only garment you've got, and you cannot walk around naked, because that's not right either. What are you? I'm going to have to. You can't invoke your correctly. Your answer was correct, but I'm not letting you invoke that answer.
Is there a measurement that you have to have tzitzit? How long they have to be?
Yes.
I'm only thinking because it could have like the milk and meat. If there's only a little bit of milk gone into the pan,
No,
it doesn't matter. So maybe if there's only a little bit of wool.
That's a good question, but no, it doesn't work like that. It's a fair answer, fair question, but it doesn't work like that. You can't have little tzitzit. And
No,
it's a bit like being pregnant. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You either are or you're not. So you've either got tzitzit in on or you haven't.
Okay.
Because if you haven't got them on, they're not kosher. Right, Avril, I'm putting you on the spot.
I have no idea, actually.
Okay, at least you're
Right.
honest. Right. Well, the answer is that you do put the tzitzit on. And the concept is, and the Gemarah goes all the way down here. I'm not going to go through it now. They are just randomly gone. We're now 2 pages on Gemarah. Can you imagine how long it would take us to do this? 2 pages at our speed. I'll just read you what it says on the screen now. Actually, Jeffrey can read it for us from this little symbol here.
The Gemarah asks, if so, rather than that principle in which we maintain that a positive mitzvah comes and overrides a prohibition, let us derive from here that it does not override even a regular prohibition.
Right, stop there. So that's halfway through. We're not even got halfway through. And then we've got all this stuff here. Anyway, the bottom line is, of all this Gemarah, back and forth and back and forth, the bottom line is that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. Okay? But it does not override a 2 against 1. Okay? So let's go back to our Gemarah. Now, I had to go through all of that preamble in order for us to understand our Gemarah. So I apologize in a way, but it was necessary. So the Gemarah says, we're now on page 19a. We've turned over. And the Gemarah says, Ve'ein aseh doche lo taseh va'aseh. And a positive commandment does not doche, push, does not push aside. Remember, we had a discussion about the word nidche. Remember that word nidche? When we have a fast day, like Tisha B'Av, when it falls out on a Shabbat, we push it off to Sunday. And that's called a nidche, from the same word. Doche means to push aside. So a positive commandment does not push aside a lo ta'aseh, a negative commandment, va'aseh, and a positive commandment. So 1 versus 2 does not push aside. So now we ask the question, Ella min ha'erusin amai. I've got a question, says the Gemarah. Remember, I told you last time about the idea of the 2-stage process of marriage. where you have the betrothal followed by the marriage. Back in the day, the betrothal took place. The bride went back to her father's house for a year, and then they had the chuppah. And nowadays, I explained last time, we spoke about this, we do them together. The first part of the marriage ceremony of ours, before the reading of the ketubah, is the betrothal, the erusin. We then stop the proceedings and we read the ketubah. And remember, I said to you, it doesn't matter what you read. You can read the yellow pages if you like, but we read the ketubah because first of all, because it's relevant, and second of all, it shows how clever you are at reading Aramaic. And then you do the second part of the ceremony, which includes the Sheva Brachot, and that is the Nisu'in, the marriage. But back in the day, there was a year, not just a 5-minute jobby while they read the Ketubah. There was a year gap, all right? And I also explained to you last time that if, for whatever reason, the marriage goes off between the betrothal and the marriage and the wedding itself, they need a get. They are sort of married, even though the marriage has not been consummated. So that is why the rabbis brought in this idea that we do the erusin and the nisuin together, so there's no time for that situation to go wrong, because it's a problematic situation, because she's neither a free woman nor is she properly married. So we don't want that situation. It's complicated. So that's why they brought together the two ceremonies. But back in the day, there was this year's gap. So the Gemarah asks a question, and it's a brilliant question. What happens if a betrothal takes place between the brother of a Kohen Gadol and a woman, and in the time while she's still betrothed but not yet married, so that year, she dies?
She dies.
He dies. Sorry.
He dies, yeah.
Thank you, Johnny. He dies. The groom, the bridegroom dies. According to halacha, she's a sort of a widow, because if she'd been divorced, she'd have been a sort of a divorcee. So she's a sort of a widow. Okay? So if she's a sort of a widow, then the Kohen Gadol cannot marry her, because the Kohen Gadol, that's the brother, can only marry, it says you can't marry a widow, but she is still a virgin, right? So we haven't got a 1v2 anymore, have we? In this situation, we haven't got a 1 saying you must do Yibum versus 2 saying you must marry a virgin and you're not allowed to marry a widow, because she is a virgin. So what you're left with is a 1v1, a positive commandment to do Yibum and a negative commandment not to marry a widow. And you could also throw in that she's not a real widow. She's only a sort of a widow, right? So the Gemarah's got a brilliant question, no? What about our situation where this Yibum situation arises with a woman who is betrothed but not yet married? Yavo asay v'yidche lo ta'asay. Our positive commandment of Yibum should come along and push aside our negative commandment not to marry a widow. And you would say, yeah, you're right. You're right. So I'll give you, don't look on, I'll take that off the screen. I'll give you an answer. The answer is that in this situation, he is not allowed to do Yibum with this woman. And yet we have said, and I showed you, even though we didn't go through it all, I showed you in Yevamot that a positive commandment overrides a negative. So really, the Yibum should go ahead, shouldn't it? But it doesn't. Who is going to tell me why, in this particular situation, the Yibum is still not allowed to take place, even though it should be able to take place, because it's a 1v1, and the positive should take precedence over the negative, and especially because this negative is not 100% negative anyway, because she's not 100% widow. Any suggestions if you haven't already read on?
Is it that there may be a chance that she's not a virgin?
Oh, that's very suspicious of you, Julia. In which case, the Cohen, the brother, would not have been allowed to marry her in the first place. So I don't think we can invoke that one. That's very suspicious minds of you, Julia.
But the brothers are Cohen. Is it the brothers are Cohen as well?
His brother is a Cohen, presumably. Yeah.
Yeah.
If he's a Cohen, his brother's a Cohen.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll not get it, so I'll tell you. Let's have a look in the Gemarah. It's a piece of Gemarah genius, and it is the flip side of a very, very important modern day halacha. Don't ignore the fact that I've got my hand up. Apparently, my computer, every time I lift my hand to gesture, it thinks I'm lifting up my hand. I'm not clicking my hand there. So we'll just try and take that hand down. I don't know how it works. Anyway, ignore it. So this is the flip side of a very, very important modern halacha, which I hope we'll get to in the next 15 minutes. So the Gemarah says, Gezeirah bi'ah rishona atu bi'ah shni'ah. Bi'ah is the word, the halachic word for consummating the marriage, intercourse, sexual intercourse. Bi'ah comes from the word ba, to come to a woman. We have it in the when you see in the Torah, when a man marries a woman, it says ba eleha, he comes to her, and that so bi'ah is the word for intercourse. So the rabbis forbade the first intercourse because of the second intercourse. Okay, now what does that mean? The first act of intercourse with this woman by the Kohen Gadol, according to the strict halacha, would be permitted, would it not? Julia's already clocked it now. It would be permitted because he's doing Yibum, and that's a positive commandment. And it overrides the negative commandment of marrying a widow. There is no positive commandment against the virgin because she is a virgin. But what happens when he has intercourse with her the second time? Julia, tell us. You're muted.
I don't think he's performing a mitzvah.
Well, first of all, it's no longer the mitzvah, although there's a different mitzvah. We'll come to that. But secondly, she's not a virgin.
Wait a second.
The second intercourse is with somebody who is not a virgin. So the second intercourse is a 2v1. Yeah? The second intercourse is a 2v1 because she's no longer a virgin, and he is only allowed to marry a virgin. Now, it's a bit shvach because we have said last week, and Avril Links was the one that got it, and that is that it's when you marry that is important, not afterwards. So what they said was, they said the Yavama, the Yavama, when it's a second time, there would be a possibility that it was be a 2v1 situation, and therefore it wouldn't be allowed. And so you can't marry a woman, consummate the marriage, and then never have marital relations again. You can't do that because there is a negative commandment against that. Ona ksuta she'era. You have to provide for a woman. What do you have to provide for a woman if you are a husband? Clothing, sustenance, and conjugal rights. You are not allowed to, as a man, you are not allowed to deny your wife conjugal rights. By the way, that doesn't apply the other way around. There is no halacha that says a woman cannot deny her husband conjugal rights, in the Torah at least. Yes, Julia.
In your Tanakh share, isn't there an episode? Oh, it was the wife that David married, and she was married to she was married to somebody else who didn't have sex with her at all, and they wrote you said that they wrote a Shechayil about him.
Okay, yes, you are talking. Oh, yes, You are talking about Michal, Michal, the wife of David, who was given by Michal's father Shaul to another man. Oh, now see if I can remember his name. Was it Achitophel? Can't remember. He was given to another man. You're absolutely right, Julia. And one of the explanations for that was, how could he do such a thing? Because she's an Eshet Ish. She's only allowed to marry one man, right? A woman cannot have two husbands. Never mind Rabbeinu Gershom or not. There's no, that's halacha, okay? And this man, I don't know if it was Achitophel. Anyway, whoever it was that she was given to, one of the explanations was that they put a sword in the marital bed, remember? And that was to remind him not to have any hanky-panky because she was married to somebody else. You're quite right on that, Julia. There is so she wasn't really married to him. That's the point in that situation. Yes, Hannah.
I'm a little bit confused. The fact that the first cohabitation is okay originally led me to believe that it's only the first cohabitation that's considered Yibum. And I was under the impression that the first child is considered the child of the brother. So
that's true.
Yeah, after the first time, he's no longer Miyabim. Yeah, he's no longer doing.
You're right. You're right. You're right. The concept of Yibum needs to be picked apart. So like in every situation where we're talking about procreation, the man and the woman have an obligation. We have a mitzvah, don't we? Pru uravu, be fruitful and multiply. There is a mitzvah to have children. Okay? What is that mitzvah? How do you fulfill that mitzvah? You fulfill that mitzvah by trying your best, right? If you do not have relations, if a man and a woman do not have relations and don't have a child, well, that's obvious they're not going to have a child because they haven't had relations. But if they do, and they are not blessed with a child, they have done whatever they can do to have a child. Okay? So in terms of the Yibum, it is the obligation of the man to try to have a child with that woman. And once he has tried once, he has fulfilled his mitzvah. If it doesn't happen that first time, he's still fulfilled his mitzvah because he has done what he can do. The rest is up to God. If God wants him to have a kid, he'll have a kid. The second part of the Yibum, which is really, as you said, the reason for the Yibum, is that the name of the deceased should be built up and that first child should be considered to be so that first child, whether it comes from that first Yibum attempt, if you like, the Yibum has got two partners, like three partners, sorry. Like every child that's born, there are three partners. There's the man, the woman, and God. The man and the woman have to do their bit, and then God has to do his bit. The child from Yibum is no different. The man and the woman do their bit, and that first Yibum, that first cohabitation, is the Yibum. He has fulfilled his obligation of Yibum there. And that's what this Gemarah is coming to teach us, actually. You learn from this Gemarah that the mitzvah of Yibum is that first cohabitation. If it brings about a child, well and good. If it doesn't, he has fulfilled his obligation to do Yibum. If later on a child is born to this couple, God, as it were, has delayed his part of the Yibum, but that's nothing to do with us. That's God's business when he decides that a child should be born. So you're right. You're right that it doesn't quite fit in, but it works if you split the Yibum into kavanah. What is the intention? The intention on that first Yibum is to build up the family of the deceased. When God makes that happen, that's his business.
But biologically, as far as I know, it doesn't necessarily have to form a child on the first time, the first cohabitation. So why does the Gemarah not say that the first child will be the child of the
It's
brother?
two separate parts. You could argue, and that's what the Gemarah is teaching us. The Gemarah is coming to teach us that you're not right, because if you were right, and it's a reasonable suggestion, if you were right, then it would be an obligation on the man and the woman, but actually the man, there's no obligation on the woman, but let's call it both, because you can't do it one without the other. It would be an obligation, according to you, it would be an obligation that every time a woman was fertile, in other words, every month during their fertile period, it will be an obligation to have intercourse until a child was born, according to your logic, because you've not done Yibum until a child is born. No?
No,
Tell me where that logic is not right.
My translation, he is prohibited to keep her for a second act of cohabitation. That means he's prohibited because of, he's prohibited the first because of the second. So they're saying here, he can't even have a second shot, even if they both want to.
Correct. That's right. And that's why he can't do Yibum. So again, let's go. You've jumped the gun. Let's go backwards to your very reasonable question. And that is, forget that it's a Kohen Gadol now. We're talking about Yibum altogether. The point of, and this is a really very important halacha and an important concept. If the point of Yibum, the only point of Yibum, is to have a child for the dead man, then there would be no Yibum with a woman who has had a hysterectomy. There would be no Yibum with a woman who's gone through the menopause. There would be no Yibum with a woman who, for whatever other reason, was not able to have a child. And we know that's not the case. Okay? The job of
there's something wrong with the man as well, isn't it?
Oh, that's another question. We'll come to that in a sec, Johnny. I'll come back to that. Fair point. So let's stick with the woman at the moment. The meyabem, the man who is doing Yibum. If the whole point of it is to have a child with that woman, and if you will say that if there's no possibility of him having a child, then Yibum doesn't exist, then there would be no Yibum for those categories. And we know that's not the case. And therefore we know there are two elements. Let me finish. There are two elements to this. The man has to do his bit, right? His bit is to do Yibum with the woman. All right? If God decides that she shall have a baby, whether she's got a uterus or she hasn't got a uterus, whether she's gone through the menopause or not, it's happened before. Look at Sarah Imenu, okay? It can happen. A miracle can happen, right? It's not our business. Our business is to do what we are meant to do. And the reason that this is so important is that it shows us that we have an obligation to fulfill mitzvot, even if in our estimation of things, what we're doing is a waste of time. If it's a mitzvah to do it, it's a mitzvah to do it. Okay, we have to do Yibum. Okay, the rabbis today have decided we don't do Yibum, we do Chalitza to get out of Yibum. That's a different reason altogether, right? But we're talking philosophically here, and this is the most important thing. Philosophically, the fact is, we have a mitzvah to do Yibum. It's not our business to go along saying, it isn't going to work, I'm not going to try. That is not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is God says, do it, do it. What God decides at the end of it, whether something comes of it or not, that's his business, right? And so,
it's the same with all that Helen was saying at the moment, isn't it?
And it's the same for the man, Johnny. Even if the man is infertile, right? With many, many examples in every single year, in every single place, there are men who have been considered infertile in the past who fathered children. One little lone sperm finds its way out. Only a tiny little thing is required, right? You know, so it happens. So whatever we might think Doesn't matter. Our job is to do the mitzvah we've been shown, we've been told to do. What the outcome of that mitzvah is, we leave to the Almighty. And this concept of Yibum, whereas apart from somebody like Philip Lehrer, who had the opportunity to do the mitzvah of Chalitza, very rarely does it come across our opportunity to do that mitzvah. If it does come across our opportunity to do that mitzvah, and by the way, if the halacha had been that we didn't automatically do chalitza, and if Philip, at the time, Philip was not a widower, Gila was still alive, but let's say Gila was not still alive, or he was a single man, and Yibum was still allowed, this woman was his sister-in-law was way past the menopause. She was in her 70s, right? It would still have been a mitzvah of him to do that Yibum, right? Because that's halacha, that's what you've got to do. Not our business to go second-guessing the Almighty. And that philosophy is really important. It's really important because if we don't accept that concept, then all the mitzvot becomes subjective. I might think it's a waste of time doing this mitzvah. What a waste of time. I'm not going to build a sukkah this year because the weather forecast is so bad that it's going to fluffy down the whole of sukkahs, and I'm never going to be able to sit in it, and I'm not going to waste my time doing it because it makes no sense to me. It's just not going to work. Waste of time. No, I have to do what I've got to do. Maybe there'll be a half an hour's let up in the rain, and I'll be able to do the mitzvah. Okay, not a brilliant example, but it's the first one that came to my head. We don't take it upon ourselves to be subjective about mitzvot. We have to be objective. That's what we're told to do. That is our business, to try the best that we can to do it, and we leave the outcome to the Almighty.
It's a mitzvah to say tell him, as we're saying today, but we don't know what the outcome's going to be.
Okay, we don't know. It's our mitzvah to do
Been praying for 7 months.
You might think it's a waste of time to say Tehillim. Okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Not your business. Your business is to do it, and then let somebody else worry about the outcome.
Is that a mitzvah then to say?
So this
is it a mitzvah then to say Tehillim, John?
Is it a mitzvah to say? It's a mitzvah to pray for somebody's welfare, for sure.
As we're doing today, okay.
Yeah, and all those Misha Beirachs, it's a bracha. It's a mitzvah to bless. It's part of the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your brother like yourself. You'd want somebody to pray for you, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You know, so we have to pray for them. That's V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So this Gemara that we've got here on the screen, I think it's still on the screen, shows us that the rabbis said, we are not going to put this situation in, we're not going to put this man in a situation where he can't do a second cohabitation, because the second cohabitation is actually forbidden according to Torah law. So in order to prevent him being in that position, we say, not going to do that. You can't do Yibum. You have to do Chalitza. Okay, we didn't get anywhere near where I wanted to get to today, but it's still been very interesting. Let's just finish this next little bit here. The Gemara carries on and says, Tanya Nami Hochi, we've also learnt in Kadmu Ba'ala Bia Rishona, what happens if he did do a Yibum? He forgot the halacha, or he didn't know it, and the Kohen Gadol did Yibum with his dead brother's betrothed wife. Okay, what does he have to do? He's done it now, but now he's not had a second cohabitation. Kanu, they are married. That's it. It's done. But asur l'kaimam b'biashniya. They cannot take part in a second act of cohabitation, which means they have to get divorced. So, and that is why the rabbis said, don't do it in the first place, because if you do that Yibum, it is a proper marriage, because it is allowed, strictly speaking. But we want to put a fence round that and say, we don't want to get you into a situation where you're going to do Yibum one day and the next morning you have to get divorced, because that's what will happen if you do Yibum with a betrothed woman who was married to your dead brother without having children. So the rabbi said, let's be smart about this and let's make a gezerah. Remember, the rabbis are allowed to make a gezerah. They're allowed to make a fence around the Torah. And they said, don't do it in the first place, because if you do, you're going to get yourself into bother and you're going to have to divorce the woman. Okay. Yes, Hannah.
I have a question. It's related, but not exactly. An ordinary man, Cohen, whatever, who is single, and his brother died without children, and he does Yibum in those days. Do I interpret this Gemarah as saying, if a child is born a year later, which is ostensibly not from the first cohabitation, he's not makim et beito shel achiv?
No, he is. He is, because he did the effort to do so. And the fact that the two things were disjointed doesn't matter. He is makim. He is establishing the house of his son. It just so happens that first Yibum, which is the first, it's a bit like, if you like, a little bit like the first time you take the lulav and etrog on the first day of Sukkot. That is the mitzvah. That is the mitzvah, to do it on the first day of Sukkot. It's a rabbinic mitzvah to do it on the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh day of Sukkot. Okay, it's not a mitzvah min Torah. The Torah says, "Bayom harishon," on the first day, ulokachtem lechem, you shall take for yourself the arba minim. So the mitzvah dioraita, the Torah law, is on the first day. But we are not Karaites and we're not Samaritans. We believe in the oral law. The rabbis say they added on an additional rabbinic mitzvah to take the lulav and esrog with a bracha on all the other days. So at the very least, rabbinically, he is mekim et beit beno, beit achiv.
So my query wasn't whether he should or shouldn't do Yibum. My query is, why is the second cohabitation forbidden?
Because here it's a Kohen Gadol and she's a widow and not a virgin anymore.
He's not a widow anymore. He married her. She's his wife.
She was a widow. Once you're a widow, you're a widow. Once you're a widow, you're a widow, halachically. Sorry, Julia, you're muted.
If a widow gets married again, she's not still called a widow.
As far as the Kohen Gadol is concerned, she's a widow.
Where does that emanate from?
What? Where does
What you just said, because it differentiates between a wife. So you marry a virgin and she is your wife, but you marry a widow and she's never. Does that apply to other people?
No, only a Kohen Gadol, because he's got the Torah law, which is very clear. You can't marry a widow. And the only reason he was allowed to marry a widow was because she was a virgin, and he's got the halacha of Yibum. Well, she's no longer a virgin now, and you could also argue he's no longer got the halacha of Yibum either, because he's done it. So now he's married to a halachic widow, so he can't. So the second one he can't do. So the Gemarah said, better don't do the first one to start with. Right, we need to stop. Just to remind myself, when I look at this next week, we are going to start a new category next week. But before we do that, I'm going to tell you, I said this was the flip side of a very important halacha. I'm going to tell you what the flip side is, which is, here we said, the Gemarah said, we forbade something because of what comes out later. I'm going to show you a halacha where we permit something which is forbidden in order to permit something that comes later on. Okay? It's a bit cryptic, but I'm going to show you the flip side. Nothing to do with our Gemarah, but we'll start with that, and then we will continue over here, mate lo mate, what happens with the how a Kohen Gadol mourns his children. Mourns his relatives that he's allowed to mourn. That was from the Mishnah, and we're going to go into that bit next. I want to make Johnny's gone now because he said he had to go earlier. The bit that he said that I think thought we'd get to next week, we won't get to next week because we've been so slow today. But nevertheless, we'll get to it eventually. So next week, I'm going to show you the flip side to what we've just learnt. And then we're going to go in to see how a Kohen Gadol does his mourning. And very interestingly, if we get to it next week, we will see the source for a minhag that we do today, which I bet you've all done. And I bet none of you know it came from this Gemarah. I certainly didn't. And that I will leave there as a little tidbit for you to consider till next week. Any questions before we go? Okay. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.